we knew going into the weekend that it was going to be a weekend full of changeable conditions, right? Qualifying was. So why wouldn't Sunday then be? Can't they just make these inferences like every other team is? I'm just asking these questions rhetorically, lads, because I'm looking for a straw to clutch onto as far as my Mercedes fandom. And right now, Shez, they give me nothing.
Fix what you can fix now. And Mercedes don't look anywhere close to doing that. They need to sort themselves out. I trust the team to do it. But, maybe as a fan base, we do now need to start getting on their case a bit, saying, no, we demand better. You've got 2 world-class drivers. Do better.
Just don't tell grown people what to do. Leave them alone. If the product is good enough and it stands up on its own 2 feet, then people will come and watch it, right? Like, don't tell people to piss off and go and watch another story. Nor tell them you should be watching and this is what you should be watching for. Like, tell the... Shez, we're going to have this conversation again, aren't we? Tell the bloody story, man. Make it entertaining.
It's almost like F1 are trying to say, oh, but we've got this incredible team happening right now. Greatness happening before you. Yes, we do. But there's an image problem around that. In that your driver won a title in controversial circumstances, the team cheated the new rule they brought in, and then you're telling us to appreciate that when actually for a lot of us we're just like, no.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown podcast. With me as always, my brothers, my co-hosts, Baxty B and Shez. How are we doing, chaps?
Don't even think about it.
It doesn't matter.
Wow.
You are doing. Had to get it.
Wow. What a nice way to return.
What a nice guy. Shez, you had it right the first time. You had it right. Now, how are we doing, chaps? Genuinely, sincerely.
Yeah,
right? Doing good. Yeah.
Surviving. How did we find the Dutch Grand Prix? It was a bit eventful, wasn't it? That Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort this weekend just passed. Shall we talk about it, mate? Because there's so many different ways that we can take this. The narratives are many. Can we talk first of all to the Braxley and Brixworth outfit, the silver arrowed car, the Mercedes? They're German, aren't they? So I don't know why I'm doing an Italian or French accent. Mate, talk to me about. Let's look at Lewis Hamilton since he's just signed a new contract. Talk to me about Lewis's race, because as I was watching it, I had so many different thoughts, strategic errors. Lewis's nightmare in quali. Like, how did you receive that first and foremost, Baxty, the way that Mercedes performed at the Dutch Grand Prix this weekend past?
This is where we're at as Mercedes fans. We are not the well-oiled machine we once were. We're kind of in our sort of Red Bull 2014 to 2016-ish era where things just go wrong and you kind of now expect them to happen. Quali was... obviously for George, it was great. P3, fantastic effort by him. For Lewis, you know what? And this annoys me to say this because obviously I'm a Mercedes fan and Red Bull the enemy, but you got to give Red Bull credit here. In Belgium, before the summer break, you had all that argument between GP and Max saying, Max was going, I just wanted to push, and they're like, no, but if you didn't do what you did, you wouldn't have made it and everything else. Whereas Lewis did exactly what Max wanted to do, and it backfired on him. And it's all, and this is what, and you look, and then you go, well, then GP now looks like a genius. GP very good race engineer as well. Obviously 2 world championships, a third one incoming. It's just mistakes like that, and people are going to blame Toto for that. No, the blame for that is with Lewis and Bono. I don't like criticising Lewis, obviously, but you have to when he makes a mistake, and he made a mistake. Yeah,
he should have extrapolate that out, because I think that's a key point you're making.
Well, the whole point is that he should have been able to read that the track was drying quickly, a la Spa 3-4 weeks ago, and he should have been like, right, okay, don't push the first lap and then go for the second lap. But at the same time, Bono and the strategy team should have been able to read that situation as well. But nobody can read that as well as the guy in the car with his backside planted almost on the track. And nobody can read conditions as well as Lewis most of the time. He should have understood that better. Somebody with his experience as well should have done that better. And then you look at the strategy calls in the race and everything else. They got lucky in the end. They did, because the first strategy call was dreadful. I'll let Shez get into that one, but yeah, we've been saying this for a few weeks now. Fix what you can fix now, and Mercedes don't look anywhere close to doing that. They need to sort themselves out. I trust the team to do it, but maybe as a fan base, we do now need to start getting on their case a bit, saying, no, we demand better. You've got two world-class drivers. Do better.
Bloody Nora Baxty, drop it like it's hot. Shez, talk to me, sir, about this Mercedes fiasco at the Dutch Grand Prix, bruv.
Wow, I mean, that was impassioned.
That was very powerful, right? Very powerful.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start marching on the back of that Baxty. I'm telling you, differently.
I have to say, okay, the qualifying was a bit of a mess, and yeah, I totally take your points about the quali 2 exit, and I guess Lewis is in a slightly different position where he can't really make mistakes because he doesn't necessarily have the pace if it doesn't go perfectly, but the likelihood is that if he hadn't been impeded by Yuki Tsunoda, he probably would have made it through to quali 3. And the thing that's galling about this,
if some buts again, mate. If some like, I don't want to labour the point here.
I will say, I will concede that the impeding was a large part in Lewis's exit, but my point is kind of the wider, just the nous of Mercedes seems to have gone.
That's what I'm saying. So like, this is meant to be a world-class outfit, Shez, and I've stopped you mid-thought, but I'm so aggrieved at the direction of travel of Mercedes. I can't help myself, bruv, at this stage. Can we just not be sick and tired and fed up with the bloody excuses for now? Like I'm done with it all. Like it's tiring. Okay, so the car's not fantastic. Not that anymore though. We've forgiven them for their design philosophy sins. That's like done right, sunk cost. But it's the way they move on track still just leaves a lot to be desired. The second that you see it's changeable conditions or changeable weather on the Sunday, of all of the 10 teams on the grid, that one team in particular is going to struggle with that because they move like the Titanic, right? It takes 10,000 gazillion years to get anything done or to make a decision and take an action, Shez. I'm forgive me for my lack of patience with this team at the moment. And again, I'm still backing them. I'm trying hard here, Shez, but I'm just about on zero as far as my patience scored. Like I've just got nothing.
I mean, I think I've got a lot more patience than zero. Look, a lot of should we just talk about what actually happened in the race and why we're all sort of upset about this? Okay, so on the grid, pretty much everybody was on softs other than Lewis, right? So the idea there was that he would run long and have a quick tire at the end of the race if it stayed dry, which I think actually was given that he was starting, was it 12th, 13th? I think that was probably a reasonable thing to do. Then you have a rain shower, and it wasn't just Mercedes that was saying this. It was everybody was saying, look, we don't think this is going to be a particularly long rain shower, which is why you had a divergent strategy of some people that were saying, right, we'll come in straight away, which was the Checo Zhou Guan Yu route, and then others that thought that they'd hang it out for a bit longer, which was probably not the prime strategy, but it wasn't a bad strategy. But Mercedes got caught out being somewhere in the middle, and there was a big outcry, not just from us, but also Toto was really upset about it and said, this is unacceptable, we can't do this, it made us look amateur. Fine, all of that. But in the moment, and in the absolute moment, if you've got a radar that tells you that the rain is going to stop, and you're on a strategy where you want to keep going for as long as you possibly can, then that the priority for you is to try and keep that window and not waste 40 seconds and then another 40 seconds coming in and going out. It's easy to look at that in hindsight and go, the rain came, and the rain stayed out, we made a bad decision. But that's hindsight. Checo made an inspired call, and he's rightly touted for that. But it wasn't necessarily the obvious choice. People were questioning it when it happened. It's only in hindsight that you know that that was the right thing to do. In terms of the wider thing that you're talking about, Mercedes in their dominant years have always had performance to fall back on, right? We've talked about this a lot, that the operational and the strategy side of things never needed to be quite as good as Red Bull's and other teams because they had the performance to bail themselves out 9 times out of 10. Now they don't have the performance. Those things are being exposed. And the reality of this is that anything in F1 takes time. So I understand that you don't have a lot of patience, but expecting 8 years worth of strategy, build up, infrastructure to change like that, I don't think it's realistic. And just to make that point, James Allison said something after Spa, or maybe it was sometime in the summer break, and it was echoing what I'd been talking about in terms of the capital expenditure stuff with Williams. What he's saying is that they're having to spend so much on developing the car and they're using up a lot of their operational expenditure on that, not having enough capital expenditure to spend on the infrastructure, and that includes how they develop their strategy, how they develop their operations, means that they're having to stick with what they had before, which may not be fit for purpose right now, but that's a money thing. And again, goes back to what I was saying about all of these teams need a bit more money to spend on capital.
That's fair, Shez. That's fair. Let me address you first. I just think we're for me to agree with you, Shez, I feel like I'm doing Mercedes a disservice because these aren't... Okay, look, let's segment. So I think George Russell, as I was watching in real time, I agreed with all of the points that you've just made, Shez. I think everybody can be a genius with the benefit of hindsight, which by the way, is always 2020. Nailed it, bruv. However, I'm looking at George, and I think George is a mistake.
Yes,
but a mistake that's like...
No,
George has just said, all right, you know, I'm gonna at this stage I'm gonna take a gamble. I'm gonna stay out. I'm gonna go long. The conditions not varying much going forward. And if that flops, then it flops, and I'll moan on the pit radio on the radio like I did. Cool. But Lewis is in stark contrast to them being able to pursue the bloody incorrect zero pod philosophy. Lewis has been caught in a no man's land, right? like it's like, I'm going to stay out, but then, I'm not going to stay out. And luckily for them, they happened on that second stop was at the right time. But as I'm watching it, I'm looking at their processes and I'm just like, what are we, this is nonsense, yes.
I think what had happened there though was that like those calls needed to be made by the drivers, right? More than a lot of the other races. Like Checo's call was his call. Like Red Bull have clearly said that. Charles
George made
call,
his call. That call from George felt very George driven. Go on, Baxty.
I was just going to say, I remember hearing a radio clip that Lewis was like, "We really should come in here," and then Bono going, "Oh, you're going to have to feel some pain here." And that's where it should be. Somebody has to make a decision. You can't have a committee meeting over it. Yeah, be it Lewis or Bono. Bono could have said, "No, Lewis, you're staying out," or Bono goes, "No, actually, Lewis, yeah, I agree with you. We're gonna come in," or Lewis just goes, "No, Bono, shut up, I'm coming in." Like a la George 12 months ago when he said, "I'm coming in for soft tyres."
Yeah, but the alternative to that was what Charles Leclerc did, which is what actually, if you're being a forceful driver, and what I kind of expected George to do was, you know, you're at the pit entrance. You haven't actually told your team, but you know what? You just leave them no choice. Right? I'm just going to come in. I thought that was the boldest choice I've seen come out of Charles Leclerc in absolutely ages. Yeah,
I applaud him
finally.
For that. Which is what we wanted him to do.
About time, lads.
Exactly. But George, who we talk about as someone who is forceful and drives the strategy, didn't do that.
I'm not sure that he didn't. Actually, Shez, I think that was his... I didn't hear it, but I'm presuming George is one of those guys to put he's not going to be caught in a halfway house, right? I believe, again, fact check me on this, but I believe that George put all of his eggs in the stay out basket.
Yeah.
Because I think I understand how George's mind works.
Yeah.
But Lewis, on the other hand, he just ends up, okay, so it worked out well to do the reverse, the inverse of what you just said, Shez, about everything being 2020 in hindsight. But I feel like Lewis just got involved in this no man's land over. Do you know what I mean? Like it just.
But I do understand where that came from because he started on those mediums, and the entire strategy was built around going long.
I don't know, man.
I thought where he was, and what Lewis does in a car, like what his strengths are in the race. Yes, yeah.
Not
that's
knowing
what I
that there is an uncertainty baked into the conditions that are coming. Go on, Baxty.
Two things. So first of all, with George, I'm not sure he did make that call because he did do that radio message where he said, I was on for a podium today, what the hell's gone wrong? If he was the one that had made the call...
You don't think he would be saying that?
He wouldn't be saying, he'd be like, sorry, I screwed up. With Lewis, I think, I've watched the race back, but I was listening to it on the radio because I was in a car at the time. And, when I heard them say, oh, it's raining, I'm thinking Lewis has started in P13. He's had a great start, fastest reaction on the grid as well, on the mediums, which is a fantastic effort. But I'm thinking you've got nothing to lose here because he started outside the top 10. Bring him in early and see what happens. And that's me, noddy F1 YouTuber / podcaster, in a car in Norfolk, not anywhere near Zandvoort. And I'm, that was just how my brain saw it. I was like, you've this happens, do this. I understand it. I wasn't there. That was me looking at it away from the heat of battle. But I just felt it was the obvious thing to do. George, I can understand because he was higher up. Both him and Lando Norris got affected by this. They were kind of like, oh, do we risk it or not? And they got caught out by it. But because they were further up, they had more to lose. And unfortunately for them, it backfired quite massively. But for Lewis, he had nothing to lose. Throw it out there and get the inters on early and end up behind Checo. He wouldn't have led the race. He would have probably been second or third, maybe behind Gasly as well. But
I think his pace was good. I think because he was saying that he could have.
I don't know about that though, Shez. That thing. That
yeah, okay.
But what I'm saying is
the pace was good. Like it wasn't like
that's the thing. If he got himself into that position, if Mercedes had said, right, let's get Lewis in now and get him out, then he would have had good pace to potentially challenge Gasly, maybe even challenge Checo.
Podium
Max was out of sight. Alonso was very quick as well, so maybe third would have been his best shout.
Yeah, I think he was up for podium, man. But
it was there, but just because they hesitated.
It's Baxty's every bloody thing. It's hesitation. It's not making a decision. When they make the decision, it's the wrong decision. You put the dude on mediums. Like, there's no like. I just want like
the mediums was the right call. If it was a dry race strategy, they made the right call for Lewis starting where he started.
Yeah, I think so.
That was the right strategy call. Because you want to boost your chances, and I thought that was good. But as soon as the rain came down, that went out the window. Right, get him in inters.
But Baxty, I'll counter to you, bro. And again, this is very similar to the zero pod situation. When they drove that zero, or when they had the idea for the zero pod, and then went out in bloody Bahrain testing, and then looked up and down the garage and saw that they were the only one. Surely they had to think that they were being contrarian for contrarian's sake. If Adrian Newey, as an example, being the genius aerodynamic guy that he is, hadn't happened upon and dismissed a similar solution, like they're on the grid and they're mediums and nobody else is on them. It's like, what? Like, hold on, like, what's going on?
I don't agree with
that. I didn't really have a problem with that. No. The strategy, the dry race strategy was fine.
Yeah, the logic was sound there.
But how quickly? And again, I don't know the answers to these questions, and I'm being very devil's advocate driven here. But didn't they? They knew. We knew going into the weekend that it was going to be a weekend full of changeable conditions, right? Qualifying was. So why wouldn't Sunday then be? Can't they just make these inferences like every other team is? I'm just asking these questions rhetorically, lads, because again, I'm looking for a straw to clutch onto as far as my Mercedes fandom. And right now, Shez, they give me nothing.
Okay, can I just answer that question directly first? I mean, the when things go wet in F1 at the moment, and it's not Inter's weather, like it's going to be behind a safety car, and everyone was going to get red flagged, so everyone's going to come in anyway. I don't think that makes a difference. And actually, the harder compounds weren't a complete no-no. George did half the race on a set of hards, and okay, he fell back right at the end of the race, but it wasn't, he wasn't disgraced in terms of his pace. Yes, the decisions that they made at the beginning of the race were overly conservative, and that is something that they have been guilty of for a while. And I think it does come back to the fact that their infrastructure still seems to support that mode of strategy, and they haven't had a way to change it yet. My sort of philosophy on this is that, look, you've still got a bunch of people here that have shown that they can win in a sustained way. They do know how to win, but they're struggling with the tools of making that happen at the moment. But it does seem like just a matter of time before they do get there. And I still feel that, like, okay, these errors are obvious and perhaps egregious, but ultimately, Mercedes throughout this season, despite all the mistakes and the technical problems that they've had, are still second in the Constructors'
they've done all right,
Championship.
Shez, but that's not the way that I read this graph. What I'm looking at, remember we did that flipping waterfall last year about where we looked at Ferrari where they were and Ferrari where they could have been had they not made all the bloody mistakes that Charles made on track and the strategic ones. This is what I'm looking at, the potential, the upside that they're giving away for just what, in my mind, is just nonsense. Like, just poor, brass tacks, chaps, poor decision-making and decisions that are ultimately slow to be made pretty much at every single turn. And I'm just, I don't know. Whatever. It's long for
every
me.
single turn.
I just don't know. I'm just expecting. So even if they make a qualifying, even if in the race, right, because the race was fraught with jeopardy and friction and uncertain conditions, and anybody can get that wrong, right? But quali, like, I just like, how does, like Baxty said earlier, right? How is Lewis in that car and he doesn't realise that the track is drying quick enough to where it might be smart, it might just be the play not to push on lap one and then go hard through it on the second lap. And then if Lewis slips on that decision making process, supposing Lewis has a brain fade, what's the scenario analysis underneath that? Who's the safety net? It's Bono. Why isn't Bono saying no, like GP said to Max last week, no less? Why isn't Bono saying no, Lewis, listen, second lap push, mate. Save your energy for the second lap. Like, this is what I mean by every turn. Shez, there's no checks and balances. It just feels like every time it ends in an outcome towards the downside, Baxty.
Yeah. So I've got two things. So the first is that we've been very harsh on Mercedes, but they weren't a complete disaster because they actually got their strategy in the second half of the race right. The double stack that was very well executed with Lewis and George. They got them in at the right time to get them on the right tyres. And I think that benefited Lewis massively. George less so, but it did benefit both of them, and able to get Lewis certainly further up the field, and George, kind of keep him in that fight with Lando Norris. So to give them their due, they got it right later on in the race, and they did rectify that mistake that we've been reading them for. And I'm going to give you a straw to clutch on. Mercedes are not Ferrari. So,
This is true. I will take that.
Ferrari, okay, look, Charles left them in a dodgy position, but I mean, they just can't do anything right. Fred Vasseur is probably tearing out what very little hair he has left.
It's bad. It was bad. And the car, it seems, under Charles Leclerc has been bad for the past couple of weekends, lacking front end. And again, if you're a driver like Charles Leclerc, the one thing that you need in a car of that ilk is a bit of front end, eh? So that doesn't bode well, mate. Go on then, lads. Finally on this Mercedes, before this becomes the Mercedes podcast. New deals for George Russell and Sir Lewis Hamilton, both gone 2 years, through to 24 and 25. Take that. To that, Shez, you react how, sir?
Probably, both expected, saw both those deals coming, and I think it's probably sensible on both sides to take their deals to the end of the current rule cycles. It just leaves their options open a little bit for what's coming in 2026. Just to see what's
even on George's side. Do you think?
Yeah. I mean, because look, he's not turning his back on Mercedes, and Mercedes is not turning their back on him. It's just, I think doing 5-year deals like Lando did with McLaren it's just mental.
Shez, I think it's really interesting that George didn't find himself on at least a 3 to 4 year contract. I think that just surprised me, bruv. I think if George Russell is your guy, then you know what I mean? You give him longer than 2 years. I think that to me indicates some sort of uncertainty potentially.
Yeah, but I think the difference here though is that if it was George doing a deal with Mercedes, where Mercedes are the preeminent manufacturer on the grid at the moment and are winning everything without question, and he was the guy leading the charge, great, do a 5-year deal.
Wow.
But
so you think it's George's end why he didn't sign longer?
I mean, you can understand why Max has signed such a long deal with Red Bull, right? Because after all of the faith that he's put in them, they've given him a car and a team that deliver every single race, every single season. So it's a no-brainer for him to stick with what he knows. George has been at Mercedes for a long time, but ultimately him and Lewis, both of them, they want to win titles, and is given where Mercedes are right now. Look, I've always got faith. I still think that they've got the goods, and I think they'll come back. But can you bank the farm on it? I don't know. And maybe that's kind of what George certainly is thinking by signing a 2-year deal.
Fair play. Baxty, how did he react to the contract extensions that we knew
were
coming for the
really
past 10
happy.
years?
Yeah, I think this is great news. I think it's commonly acknowledged that the best driver lineup on the grid, pound for pound, is Mercedes, regardless of where the car is. You'll see Lewis, 7-time world champion. We don't need to see any more than that. I think he's been smart in leaving himself open. He said he could. I think last year said he could do 5 more years. So he's okay. So he said, okay, I'll give myself options for 26. Obviously, we had huge. There were big rumours going around earlier this year, which ultimately proved to be nonsense, as we know. George, on the other hand, I think is an interesting one. I was under the impression that he had signed a 3-year deal, and then this is just an extra year on top of that, because that rumour was doing the rounds that he'd been offered an extra year on top of it. I mean, I've seen some discourse in the last few days basically saying, oh, George isn't the future, we should be prioritising Lewis. It's like, well, George is the future of Mercedes, but he has to be the man of right now as well, because he's there. He needs to prove himself that he's the future long term of the team. By beating Lewis season in, season out. He did that last year. Probably not going to do it this year, but that's the way F1 goes when you're in a team that's topsy turvy. But he's also learning as well, and when Lewis does eventually step aside, be it to retire or go to another team, Mercedes can say, right, well, George, we know you're ready to go. If we have a car capable of challenging in 26, obviously we hope it's sooner, but let's say 26 when this contract comes to an end, George, you're our guy going forward, and they'll have those years in the bank with him ready to go. And who was the last man to win in a Mercedes as well? George. Straw man argument. I think I think it's great for Mercedes. I think they're putting their faith in 2 drivers that they know and trust. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Donate it, some certainty going forward, some much needed certainty. Go on then, lads. Let's talk about the bulls that are red for a couple of minutes, because there's a couple of different ways. All right, let me take it this way. Yeah, there's a very a talked about article that's been released. So let me set the scene this way. I think that was another boringly incredible drive from Max Verstappen. He's racing changeable conditions in a way where he's almost daring the weather to do what it wants to do, right? Like, because he can just stay out on dry tyres for an extra couple of laps. So God tier is his bloody car control. So they keep him out for a couple of laps longer. But ultimately, it doesn't matter, because then he catches Checo Perez like, what was it, 4 seconds a lap,
4
chaps?
seconds. Well, he took 4 seconds out of him in one lap, right?
What are we? I don't understand, chat. That's chaos. But again, probably another conversation for a day. I'll tell you this interesting story. As I was watching the broadcast, I remember there's one time when they put up the delta between, or the split time even, between Checo and Max when Checo was leading, and it was just like at start it was like 9 seconds, but they kept it up there. And it was just dropping, like it was a stock market crash. But it was like, literally at every turn, it was like 9.5. And then the next time it refreshed, it was like 8.9. You could just sit. I was like, what? What is Checo playing at? Anyway, whatever. I'll say all that to say this. There's a really good article that came out where the guy was talking about, and this is a narrative that's, it feels like it's being pushed upon us as the F1 viewing public, right? The headline was something to the effect of, Max Verstappen is nailing it at the moment and we aren't appreciating him enough. Shez, talk to me about this, bro, because I've got it's techie, this one. It is techie.
Yeah. It's interesting that the F1 would try and push it, because yes, this was one article, but actually, if you look at the course of this week, there's been quite a few articles that have been out about this. Sky just did a podcast that was entitled "Do We Appreciate Max Enough?" And it's odd that the F1 need to sort of push this narrative. I've never seen it happen before, particularly. In the Ferrari eras, especially 2004, it wasn't like F1 sort of came out and said, "Oh, we really need to appreciate what Michael's doing right now because we might never see it again." Didn't really see it in 2020 with Lewis, particularly. You did towards the end of the season, actually, in sort of a lot of the post-season reviews, but not so much in season. Maybe it is a direct response to what Cameron, you've talked about quite a lot, in that F1 feels that they're losing their viewership, and so they have to find a way to try and spice it up. Personally, and I've told you this many times, I don't think this is the way to do it. But there's slightly more insidious explanation, is that actually that somehow Max is a preordained winner, and he's been groomed for this, and the fact that people aren't appreciating the chosen one is something that's not appreciated. Maybe I think that's probably unlikely, but it's there, isn't it?
Baxty, talk to me about this, bruv, because I think this is gonna get techie.
This is gonna get techie. Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, the actual notion of the article is correct. We should take time to appreciate the great job that Max is doing, in the same way that we should have appreciated Lewis more during his dominant period. We should have celebrated Seb more during his dominant period. We should have celebrated Michael more during his dominant period. But because it was just the same guy winning over and over again, we're like, oh, it's so boring. Oh. And it's not ideal. But to win 9 races in a row is insane. I think all my haters are probably going to be looking at me right now saying, "What the hell's he praising Red Bull for?" But it's to turn up and do that job, race in, race out, is so hard. It's slightly easier when you don't have competition, because we haven't seen that Red Bull go fully flat out yet, other than Monaco Sector 3. But I think they're still turning up and they're still delivering. They're still delivering fastest pit stops. They're still delivering, certainly with one driver in the car, absolutely nailing it, getting everything right operationally. It's incredible to watch in that regard. But in terms of sporting contest, I'm bored. I'm bored. It's not fun. So it's that kind of flip side. And yeah, it was the same during the Mercedes dominance, but as I've said before, you had other instances that kind of kept you interested, like Lewis and Rosberg, like the Ferrari challenge, and then obviously we had 21 as well. And I just think that, the problem that I think Formula One doesn't realize they have is they have an image problem in that you have a driver that won his first title in controversial circumstances, and that was never resolved in any meaningful way. That kind of just sits there like a sort of sore. And then you've also got a team that cheated. Let's call it what it is. Red Bull cheated, and they're the ones dominating, and the punishment that they've given doesn't seem to have had any effect on them. They're more dominant despite the punishment. And it's almost like F1 are trying to say, oh, but we've got this incredible team happening right now, greatness happening before you. Yes, we do. But there's an image problem around that. In that your driver won a title in controversial circumstances, the team cheated the new rule that they brought in, and then you're telling us to appreciate that, when actually for a lot of us, we're just like, no, we can't appreciate that because of those things. Yes, we can appreciate the job that they're doing, and we can appreciate that Max has upped his game to a new level since Miami, or since qualifying in Miami, to be precise. Yeah, he is extracting more from that car than I think, I thought he could do, and fair play to him. But there is that fundamental image problem at the center of this, and F1 don't seem to realize it, and they're trying to be like, appreciate our champions. No, they cheated.
Techie. Oh, let's go, Baxty. Go on then, Baxty. Let me ask you a quick question about the cheating thing, because every time I hear cheating, it cuts deeper, right? It's a strong word, that cheating thing. If Baxty, so this happens a lot in UFC, right, at the moment, with doping and performance enhancing. It's become like a humongous issue. They talk about that more than the fights and the fighters almost, so techy has it become. Murder and manslaughter, Baxty. If I knowingly ingest performance enhancing drugs, then of course, like, throw me away, lock me away and throw away the key. Course, cheating. But if I take in a supplement unknowingly, and that has, or say if I take in a supplement and I don't know that has a performance enhancing drug, is that still cheating, Baxty? It's against the rules.
Yeah,
we agree that that's against the rules.
Look, I'm a massive athletics fan. I've watched athletics since I was, young. So I used to do it when I was at school as well. And you see athletes all the time get suspended because I took a supplement or whatever else and it returned it. You are in control of everything when it comes to your career. Like, yeah, you've got nutritionists and everything else. Like the famous one was Asif Papal. He claims he took a supplement and that led to a failed drugs test. But at the end of the day, you are in control of what you put in your body. You have to be so careful. In the same way that an F1 team needs to be so careful with their finances. Like, be it claiming the tax credit or that they should have done, knowing that actually maybe we shouldn't have gone over on our catering costs. You know what the regulations are. You need, okay, look, yes, they're being run by the FIA who couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery, but
there you go. True.
But you've still got to do your due diligence, which is what a lot of teams did in the practice season in 2020. It was 2020, wasn't it? Whereas Red Bull made mistakes, and that you are in control of that. If you screw up, I'm sorry, I don't care. That's still you've cheated knowingly or not. You're in control. You have to do better.
It's techy. Let's go, Baxty. I feel like cheating, for me, for my money, I feel like cheating is too strong a word for what happened with the cost cap. Bless you, Shez. It's too strong a word for what happened with them and the cost cap. Just because if it was per Ross Brown's chat that they fraudulently breached the cost cap, then cheat straight away, but because it was a bit techie and it was only 400, it's like, oof, I don't know if cheating is the word that I would use. But anyway, let's peg back to Max Verstappen and this narrative that they keep trying to push. I don't even know. It's okay. So the 9th is incredible, yeah, and he's probably going to go and do 10, and that'll be him by himself then, right, next week at Monza, or this weekend at Monza even. For me, as I'm watching Max, what's always spoken to me in terms of greatness, Shez, is the occasion, right? The Monaco Sector 3, like that's what. That's not in any way to diminish nor trivialise the consistency that he's put on show all season, right? Like he's been absolutely incredible. What I don't like though, chaps, I don't like anything to be forced down my throat. The way that I watch F1 is the way that I watch it. Leave me alone and let me watch it accordingly. Stop telling me what I need to be looking out for, whether that's like the technical aspect or the plot. No, like I'm going to watch it. And I don't think people, new or old fans, I don't think they want to be patronised, right? Because let's be under no illusions here, chaps. F1 is a labour of love. There's lots of stuff. We've all got families and loved ones and partners. Like, on average, I don't know, depending on how long the race goes, it's a commitment, right? It could be like one FT worth, like a whole day's worth of work watching F1 over the course of a weekend, especially if you're going to commit to 3 practices, quali, and the bloody race. That's like 7.5 hours minimum. So what I don't want, with all that said, and with that front and centre of the mind, I don't need to be told by anyone how I need to be watching F1, nor what I should be appreciating. You can go and take a running jump, whoever wants to tell me that. I'm not having it, chaps. I think it's outrageous what we need to appreciate Max. That almost makes me I think Max is, like, chaps, I've gotten a lot of flack for being on the Max Verstappen hype train. I'm there. When I see that dude drive, and he drives, like, I'm amazed. I think he's been ridiculous. But I'm not prepared to have is somebody tell me how and why and what I should be looking out for when I'm watching F1. That makes me want to draw for the Max Verstappen checks and balances. It feels a bit contrived, right? And I know that it's on the back of their fit. I know for a fact they haven't released them yet because they're lagging, but their viewing figures will be diminishing. In North America, they've said that year on year, if you compare half one this year to half one last year, they're down. Year on year, they are down. It's something like 400,000 down. So it's not massive, but it's only going to get worse. And I'm convinced now that we'll be peddling this. They're peddling this narrative because they're seeing the viewing figures in real time and trying to. This is like, oh, don't go away. You got to keep watching, and this is what you got to keep watching for. Baxty, talk to me, bro.
Yeah, I've just had a thought. Do you remember how I remember you in particular, Cam, got really angry with Korean Chandok saying, "Oh, if you can't find anything to be interested in, then why are you watching?" Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Or if you can't find that exciting, why? Well, that it feels like the complete polar opposite. It's almost like, no, don't go and find the other things exciting. Appreciate this when actually you don't see Max for 3/4 of the race anyway because he's just cruising off into the distance, much in the same way that we never saw Lewis during his period of dominance. Because they weren't being touched. You might see them pop into the pits. You might hear the odd radio call. Don't. It's give and take. Don't tell us to find things exciting, and then on the other hand say, but if you're going to find things exciting, it has to be this one thing.
But Baxty, you know what it is, bro? Just don't tell grown people what to do. Leave them alone. If the product is good enough and it stands up on its own 2 feet, then people will come and watch it, right? Like, don't tell people to piss off and go and watch another store, nor tell them you should be watching and this is what you should be watching for. Like, tell the Shez, we're going to have this conversation again, aren't we? Tell the bloody story, man. Make it entertaining for FFS. Chaps, I'll be honest with you. Look, like, all of the shorts, like, I watch a lot of you. I love YouTube, right? And I love sports. So obviously the Ikigai diagram is sports on YouTube. That's all that I watch. I watch... because my feed, it comes into that. I watch a lot of CBS. Right? I can't remember the last time I watched 90 minutes worth of football, chaps, I'll be honest with you. But CBS Golazo, and bloody Kate Abdo and Micah and Jamie Carragher are on there every single day. And every time they pop up, I will watch them because they're having fun and it's enjoyable to watch and it's entertainment. They're hooking me. Where is that for Sky? Okay, so Pinks is, I like Pinks. She's jokes. Crofty gets me. Brundle, but they're not really. Brundle has a little bit of fun with it. Ted also, but it's not fun enough to. Here's the proposition that they're facing, right? I feel like the broadcast, they are trying because they're getting drivers to do like liar tests and all this lie detector tests and whatever, but still it's not enough. They at the moment need to bridge the gap as far as their entertainment gap, right? Be fun enough to where I can show my missus the footage, who's never watched an F1 race in her life, and she's going to enjoy it and want to know what's Roy Keane saying next week, or what's Micah been on this week, because do you know what I mean? You need to give us a reason. Don't tell us why we need to be watching. You as the broadcast team need to be part of that reason. Like we don't interface with the drivers as much as we do with like the Sky broadcasting team, do we? Pinks and bloody Ted, Crofty, Brundle. So like they're I think they're partially responsible. Shez, tell me I'm wrong, bruv.
I can't and I won't. But the first thing about like people telling you, Cameron, we talked about this already. It's not you they're trying to keep, right? This isn't aimed at you. This is aimed at the people that are teetering on the brink of leaving. But it's a last-ditch attempt to try and get them interested in something that they are fundamentally not finding interesting. And I'm glad to hear what you just said, because we've moved on from trying to change the sporting spectacle, i.e. tinkering with the rules and stuff, and we're acknowledging now that this is a broadcast issue, not an F1 sporting issue.
I mean, it wouldn't hurt those shares, I'll be honest with you.
Sure, but this is stuff that you're going to pay off down the line, and I'll come back to that point in a second because I think it's important. But right now, they're always catering to the lowest common denominator, which is that is focusing on what is happening on track, when that isn't necessarily the most interesting thing that is happening in F1 at the moment. Lewis and George have just signed a new 2-year deal. One of the biggest things they said that I found that actually made me like really hyped for all of this was that they were saying, the reason that we've taken this 2-year deal is to try and get Mercedes back to where they have been, where they deserve to be. And I'm hooked on that journey. That's what I want to see. It's a sporting challenge, right? That's the thing. That's the kind of thing that you want to try and promote, right? Is how is this team that have been dominant and have been brought to their knees, how are they going to get back to the top again? It doesn't have to be Mercedes. McLaren are doing the same thing. Aston have got all this brand new investment. Why is there not a story about them? You don't owe it to Red Bull, for starters, to tell their story and make Max look good when people are finding it boring to watch him. That's Red Bull's job. If you've got a better story to tell somewhere else on the grid, tell that story. If there isn't a story that isn't, if there is a story to tell that isn't necessarily track-based, if it's technical, if it's economical, if it's financial, if it's to do with the sporting regs, something, find that story, tell that story, get people interested in that. But always going to the lowest common denominator and always trying to say that the track action is the only thing that you're going to find interesting is always going to lose your people, because it's not something that you can predict. Everything else is predictable. That isn't, and there's no point trying to do that. And the point I was going to try and make before is that my theory about drivers is always this, that it's these seasons, the seasons where they're dominant and they're not challenged, that they're learning this stuff. And Max has actually said it specifically, that when he was last beaten in a race, which was Baku, he used that to try and play with his setups and things like that, to try so that that's then set him up on the run that he's had subsequently. And I think when you pitch him into a battle again with someone, that the Max I wasn't convinced at the beginning of this run the beginning of 2022, that if he did his learning in these dominant years, that he would necessarily come out a better driver at the other end, capable of beating another Titan. I am much more convinced now, because the level of adaptability that boy has in any situation, it doesn't matter what you throw at him, what potential pitfalls there might be in front of him, he still manages to come out on top. That's the thing that you need to take away from what Max is doing right now, and what will make whatever battle he gets into when cars are a bit more equal, titanic.
So all very true said, and very good points, very well made. Baxty, tell me, bruv, am I being a bit semantic in disliking the way that the broadcasters and journalists are packaging this message, telling me specifically, because I appreciate it. But Shez is right that they're not talking to me. I appreciate it more than most, probably too much so, if anything. But am I getting my knickers in a twist saying that I don't want to be told what I should appreciate from what I shouldn't by the bloody broadcaster, to whom, Baxty, by the way, I pay in excess of 60 quid a month? It feels a bit rich, mate.
Yeah, no, you're not being semantic at all. I mean, obviously, this article was done for F1. It wasn't done for Sky, but I'm not splitting hairs there. Sky used to be really good at telling the story, and I tell you, the BBC were outstanding at it when they had the TV. Like, they did some great features. But I feel like F1 has always been a reactionary when it comes to telling its stories. Like, some of its most compelling stories are ones that happen. You think of Spygate, you think of Crashgate, you think of all the gates, that have happened over the years, and they're very good at telling those stories as they happen. But even though I've never been the biggest Red Bull fan, you kind of felt invested a little bit in their journey when they started winning in 2009. You're like, oh yeah, everyone's talking about Brawn, because that needs to be, and I can't wait for that Disney Plus documentary. Red Bull were coming, and you're like, actually, yeah, we've got to keep an eye on them. And that story was being told. And the Mercedes story, it's George is beating Lewis all the time. It's like, oh, great, but let's see where they are at the end of the season. And Mercedes are really bad at the moment, and it's like, well, yeah, but let's talk about how they're recovering. Not enough has been given to Aston Martin. Not enough has been, particularly to McLaren. I think McLaren in the last few races have been outstanding. But what with Sky in particular, I feel like their pundits are a bit neutered. I feel like they're treading this line.
Maxty, go on, I'm keen, bro.
Yeah,
go on.
Like, Damon Hill on Twitter is not the Damon Hill we see on Sky Sports. Damon Hill on Twitter is box office, because he just speaks his mind. He could talk absolute nonsense, but you're going to want to read it. But when he's doing the punditry, he's all a bit nicey, everything else. The only two pundits that were worth listening to were Johnny Herbert and Paul di Resta. What happened to them? They got sacked.
This is the case in point, isn't it, Baxty?
It's just... Yeah, these were the guys that were actually willing to go out there and tell a story. Okay, look, Paul di Resta was, in the Max camp. Johnny Herbert just called it as it was. But you wanted to listen to them and you were engaged. Like, I love Jenson Button, but he's boring as hell on the comms.
Mate, please.
I love Jenson, but no, come on. Like, actually let these guys have a voice and actually call stuff out. That's why Nico Rosberg is so good.
Box office.
Because Nico doesn't care. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
And I think just... let these guys really speak their mind. If they're worried about the FIA slapping their wrists, it shouldn't matter. You're there to do a job. You're there to commentate. You're there to call things out. Crofty does it occasionally. But just allow these guys to call it out. Allow them to tell the stories that are there. Ted is perfect for that. Ted does that better than anyone. And just let them tell their stories. And I think I want to see more of that. Like, one of my favourite features, I think it was last year, was when Ted went to the Ferrari factory. And it was just amazing to watch Ted just wax lyrical about the history of Ferrari and talk about how good they are.
Yeah, Baxter, I don't know, bro. This really concerns me, going forward, because I just not fit for purpose, chaps. Love them to bits, but I just don't think they're fit for purpose still. Let me tell you, the case in point the other day, I remember on the Sky podcast, not this week's one, but the last week's. And again, by the way, they keep desperately trying to have Tomo on there and Break to spice it up, but it's still Like it's just like reaching, man. Damon was on there. I think Break was on there with Damo, and Pink said got onto Damon talking about Beyonce, like he went to Beyonce concert, didn't he, with his little ones? And he was like, "Watch this back, I swear it's brilliant." And Damon's like, "Yeah, well, I don't really like Beyonce, but ultimately my girls are like, the kids are like loving it, so we went and they loved it. But ultimately, I was a bit, what did he say? Not offended, shocked or something like that about the Beyonce concert." And you could see Pink's literally just went, he was like, so I say that all to say that I just think media and broadcasting is kind of like not passing some of these guys by. I don't want to get like ageist of it, but there's a way to it. Okay, look, specifically, be precise, Cameron. The demographic that F1 have done so well through stuff like social media presence and Drive to Survive to attract, that they now need to keep the current internationally syndicated broadcasting team with the likes of Damon Hill and Martin Brundle, and I suppose Crofty and Ted Kravitz get it, but Jensen Lesser, brilliant driver, not a great broadcaster in my humble opinion, and definitely not going to do anything in terms of keeping this demographic that Drive to Survive has done so well attracting. This needs to be the priority now. You need to get some, like, not fight, I don't know what the word is. So Nico's the perfect guy to have. Nico there every single, pay him whatever he needs, right? Get him there every single race, because when Toto comes, he's got that relationship with Toto to say, "Toto, what happened with this bloody strategy, mate? I know it was nonsense. What were you thinking, chap?" Or bloody Horner even, because he's not get-atable, right? Like Nasha said a couple of weeks back, he has no skin in this game. He's a world champion. You can't get at him. Like, what are you going to do to him? He's a world champion 2016 and he will always be a world champion. So he can afford to pose those questions to a Christian Horner or whoever he doesn't, Gunter, whatever the case is. He's got no fear. But the rest of them are looking around at Johnny and Paulie D and like, I need to pay my mortgage, guys. Like, I can't afford to get in Christian Horner's face. You can see the relationship that Simon and Christian have right there. They're sending each other Christmas cards, mate. Simon will never ask Christian like the hard questions, and I think that's what we're lacking at the moment, Shez.
But I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's the anchors that tend to be the problem here. Like Simon Lazenby just doesn't. He's been there for ages, but it's turned into a chummy relationship that he has with everyone, and the questions that he asks are just super bland. Whereas Baxty talked about how good the BBC broadcast was up until sort of 2009. That was one of my favourite seasons. That was the season where Jake Humphries didn't, because he didn't care about F1. F1 was his second choice. He wanted to be in football, which is where he ultimately ended up. And it meant that while he was in F1, there were no airs, no graces. Didn't care who he was talking to. This is the guy that got the Loonies interview out of Max Mosley that season. That's the level that you're trying to aim at.
I think you're doing them. Jake is like,
but you see what I mean? Like Jake Humphries was just unreal. Yeah, and now we're having to make do with, with all the respect that I can possibly muster for him, Simon Lazenby just isn't at that level, and it does seem much more like he's happy to be there to be mates with the people that he's interviewed. So he'll never particularly ask a hard question, and all of the pundits that are alongside him will take their lead from him, and you never get asked. You never have the controversial questions, unless you're Nico, and Nico isn't there all the time and is happy to kind of not toe the line.
Well, Shez, they're going the hospitality dinner at the Bulls that are red afterwards, right? So you don't want to. You can't jeopardize free drinks, Shez. Come back, Steve.
Oh, just throw money at Eddie Jordan. Seriously, that guy was.
Mate, gold.
I'll give this one example of Eddie and how he didn't care. If you can find, I don't know if it's on YouTube. Go and find his reaction to Hockenheim 2010. I will never forget this. This is the former team principal in Eddie as well coming out. And yes, it's slightly contradictory because he did exactly what Ferrari did that day, but he basically was spitting feathers that they took that win away from Felipe Massa for Alonso. And he just called it what it was. He said, "I'm going to call this theft." Oof. If you can find that clip, do it because it is gold. And like, that's the thing. Those BBC guys weren't afraid to, like, okay, DC was a little bit, but that's because he was a Red Bull employee. So you kind of, you paid that, you're like, okay, yeah, that's fine. You circled that one off. But the other guy, they didn't care. They honestly didn't care. And I feel like Sky in particular have been affected by the Ted Kravitz argument last year as well, with the whole Red Bull thing.
As you would be.
Yeah.
You can't afford not to be able to have access.
But Ted hasn't stopped, has he?
No, Ted kind of has.
He's reined himself in a little bit.
His wings have been clipped.
But he still says some stuff that I'm happy to listen to.
He's not doing every race as well because they've got Bernie Collins in now.
Oh yeah, his wings have been clipped, and I think that's a shame. But again, I think the Aesop's fable, the moral of the story, and all this is that it's a competitive space in media, right? Like, and they've just got to be very cognizant of other sports that are doing a better job in terms of entertaining, taking their lunch, because that's who they're competing with. Ultimately, they compete. You've only got so many hours in the day, right? I can't watch football matches and F1. It's an either or choice. And when bloody Kate Abdo and Micah Richards, Jamie Carragher, Roy Keane, Gary Neville, and et al. Are having fun on their broadcast, and I can watch them and have fun too. But I'm going to choose that every single day rather than what Simon, bless him. I love Simon, but it's not the. They're not. It's not fun. I would love F1 as I do. It's more fun and more enjoyable for me to watch Roy Keane and Gary Neville and bloody Micah argue and go back and forth on a broadcast. Though I love the sport of F1 more than I do football, so. Tells you all you need to know about how important the broadcast is, lads. I don't know. I think we're in a very funny space, man, where those guys are throwing out imperatives, telling you why to watch, how to watch, what you should appreciate, that you don't appreciate it enough. Feels a bit Stalin's USSR, doesn't it, Shez? Just a tad. Yeah.
I mean, it does. I mean, I still think their saving grace at the moment is that they've still got Crofty in the commentary box. I've got a huge amount of time for David Croft. Like when they announced him for Sky at the beginning of this contract, I thought you've done it. You get him and Martin Brundle in a commentary box, you've got gold every race. But now they're having a bit of a problem that Brundle is sort of taking his foot off the gas a little bit and is finding some other stuff to do because he's proven everything that he needs to prove.
You're Martin Brundle, right? And you got other interests. Sometimes you want to get behind the wheel of a racing car. Still, you're Martin Brundle.
But they caught Martin Brundle at a funny time, right? He was desperate to still be in a Formula One car when he started.
Agreed.
When he started commentating, right? And he was commentating as if he still was in an F1 car. You know, all that sitting down on the grid. This is the driver's view.
Absolutely. And
why they're doing this. I love it. Absolutely love that.
Bro, he still does it, man. When he gets trackside, it's incredible. But don't take that as you can't take that as the blue. Well, Martin Brundle was once a driver, so all the other F1 drivers that come through should also be top tier broadcasters, shouldn't they? Just that's not the logic, and I feel like that's the logic that they're using.
And I do agree with that, and it's why before I did say that it doesn't. Number one, it doesn't have to be a driver. Yes, like F1's such a massive sport. It doesn't have to be a driver that you get on as a pundit. Bernie Collins, great hire. Blake would be a great hire.
Gosh,
can you imagine?
They couldn't afford him.
But man's got charisma for miles, and that would he's not afraid to ask dodgy questions. He'd ask him because he's got something to fall back on if he wants to.
Shez, he's a different level. He's Blake, and I'll shout him out at this point because you've called his name. I like insight chats. If I'm not getting the entertainment, then I've got to be giving insight, which I think is why it's a shame that they got rid of Paulie D, because some god tier calls from that chap. Blake absolutely nailed the floor. I was looking at that Charles Leclerc thing and I just couldn't get my head around it. Why has he been for the past couple of weeks just out of sorts? Is it a Charles Leclerc thing? Is it mental? What's going on in this Grand Prix? And not once did I hear those bods on Sky Sports talk about what Blake highlighted so well, which Charles Leclerc then went on to bloody elucidate after the race, that Ferrari lacked front end. Blake's bloody pulled up the telemetry and just like extrapolated it and said, listen, that Ferrari's struggling with front end, that hence why he's feathering the throttle and not being 100% on the brake. Where were the Sky bods calling that out? No
Cameron,
chance.
that's difficult to do though. I would say in real time. So if he's having to make that call in the middle of a broadcast, that's quite tough.
But go on
right?
then, catch this. Blake did it in. That was Blake's FP2 analysis.
Yeah, but
So if
that's
these guys are
between.
going, so bang. But I want to know that going into the race, surely Blake's.
Mm.
But I knew that.
Yeah.
I read Blake's analysis before before qualifying even.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I knew
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I knew that as not the F1 fan going to the race. So why the hell weren't they talking about it? Or
It's
maybe
a
they did
fine
talk about
balance
it.
because at the same time, that really appeals to the hardcore tech heads like us. But then, to this newer generation who are only just getting in. I remember when I first started watching F1, and they did talk about things like, the revised grids, the fuel adjusted grids, and I was just sat there, just like,
But the,
But like now, I can go back and appreciate that because I've been in the game a lot longer. But
Baxty, this is the
it's a fine balancing act.
But here is the gift. Herein lies the gift of storytelling. What I'm not
Yes.
expecting, what I'm not
Yes.
demanding from Martin and or Crofty or any one of the other guys is to say, well, Charles Leclerc clearly manifesting the telemetry. Charles Leclerc struggling with front end because there's this delta between his telemetry and Lando Norris's, and that means that he's not going to be able to feather the throttle so much as he get. Like, no. Like there is a way to tell that in a way.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
There is
So
a
what
way
does
to
that
tell
mean?
that there's a way to tell that as an educator and say, okay, so that car is unstable on turning, meaning he doesn't have enough grip and he's going to lose. I'm not doing it for good. I'm not doing it. I'm not a broadcaster though, chaps.
But that is it, isn't
There
it?
is a way to do it, and there are people that they have access to that do that really, really well. AKA Nico Rosberg. Brundle does it brilliantly when he's ready. Crofty too a little bit. And I just think they need to give these guys, more airtime, more space. Get these guys. Can you imagine a podcast? So currently you got bloody, I can't even remember the guy's name. Matt
Baker.
Matt Baker.
Yeah, bang. So okay, so he chairs the podcast. How about you get Nico, Crofty, and Ted Kravitz done. That 3-man podcast and just do that every week. And I know why you can't do it because Nico doesn't have the bandwidth and he's trying to save the world. Crofty, again, he's traveling halfway around the world and needs to spend time with his family. I get that. But again, I'm hypothesizing about the upside. I think they have the minerals and the tools, but they're just Crofty, Nico, Ted, and Brundle. A 4-man podcast. They wouldn't even need to talk about. Don't even review the Dutch Grand Prix. Just mic them up, and I just want to hear them talk and reminisce about watch that. If you could guarantee, I'd pay for that. They could put that, sack off YouTube, bless YouTube, but put that on Sky every single week. I'd watch it. It'd be gold. But no, they don't do that.
If they could get those people together at the same time, it's a commitment issue, isn't it?
Yeah, logistics.
But actually, what you're saying is absolutely correct. If you look at some of the Sky documentaries that they do outside of this, I mean, I watched the Nigel Mansell documentary from Sky.
I need to watch that. Yeah.
Man, I have to say, I had no appreciation of Nigel Mansell particularly, but I watched that, I had tears in my eyes. I was like, no way, they made Nigel Mansell cry. That's the level of storytelling that you need to be need to be aiming for. I'm not saying you need to have tears every race, but I absolutely agree with you that there is a story there to tell. You need someone that's going to be able to unpack that story and tell it in a way that people can tell. Blake saying that the Ferrari has chronic understeer means nothing. Brundle telling everyone that the Ferrari doesn't have any grip, and that's why Charles is falling off the road every 5 seconds, is telling a story. I agree. Well, we're not doing it justice, but we're not paid the big bucks to do that. People like Jensen Button are, and I don't feel like that's what he does.
No. There's a really good I can't remember the name of the podcast. Some guys, I think they're Australian maybe, or from New Zealand, and they do a podcast just taking the mick out of everything. There's a really brilliant episode that they did a couple of years ago where they were taking the mick out of Jensen, and all that he was doing was just playing back what Crofty was saying. Like he was like, yeah, I think so. I think that's right, Crofty. No, that like it was just there was no poorly D, there was no back and forth or no friction. It was just.
But there's a lot of that, Cameron. Even that podcast
Parity.
I listened to the other, today, the Appreciate Max Verstappen one. It was literally Matt Baker would put something out there that was often not controversial and say, "What do you think?" And Guido van der Garde was on it. He'd be like, "Yeah, I agree with that." Okay, but that's the end of that conversation, then, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no, I don't know, Shez. It's depressing.
Have an innovative thought, maybe.
Depressing. Whatever, they can do what they want at Sky Sports. It's Rupert Murdoch. He does what he wants. Go on, Baxty. Take us.
I was going to say, after we've just slandered them for the last half an hour, I don't think we're getting any. It's any time soon.
Oh, they don't need us, mate. They've got it all under control. Good luck to them.
So we are available. Do hire us.
The joke is, chaps, I reckon in a world where they clock onto this, here's my final thought on this. Again, to reiterate, what you do with your time on the weekend, what anybody does with their time on the weekend is an either or choice, right? And when there's sports, when Sky, by the way, are covering sports like football in the way that's super engaging, F1, there's going to come a stage when F1 are going to need to cotton on quickly. They're going to need people who are engaging, who ooze that riz, as the kids are calling that charisma, and are able to articulate a difficult concept, a driving physics concept or telemetry, whatever is in the way that a Blake can, that can crack a joke and give you that underlying knowledge in a way that a Tomo can or a Baxty can, that have that underlying encyclopedic knowledge like a Shez, and can talk to that in a way that's engaging. And I reckon, here's my prediction, you can take this to the bank, I think we're about 5 to 10 years behind football and the way that football cover it. Guaranteed, chaps, in the next 5 years, they will be getting on. They will not be getting on. They will need a Shez, a Tomo, a Baxty, a Break. They will need them. It's only a matter of time until the numbers grow and get bigger and more people gain access to those names and more eyes are on those names, that there's this symbiotic relationship, right? Because they need the numbers, they won't have any alternative, and it'll be brilliant. I'll be watching more. Can you imagine, chaps, a Brundle, Nico, Shez and Baxty podcast on Sky F1? Flipping Nora. Like,
I wasn't on it. I definitely watched it.
Sign me. No, I'd lap it up, chaps. I'd lap it up. But the latest.
Sat there like this,
Mate, no, you wouldn't know, Baxty. This is the point. Baxty, this is the point. No, Baxty, I don't think you would. You'd be challenging both of them and telling them what for, and that's why people would be watching Friction. The same reason why people are buying it. Go on, Soja.
No, I was going to say, you can definitely imagine our confused faces at every comment. What are you talking about?
You'd be killing it, lads. You'd push back on them. You wouldn't care. I know you both well enough to know that if Brundle said something that you disagreed with, neither one of you would be like, "Oh, that's Martin Brundle. Let me not say anything." You'd be like, "No, respectfully, Martin." I'd beg to differ, mate, and that's what I think is necessary. But what do I know, mate? I'm not a broadcaster nor my producer. I am just Cameron F1, and he has been Baxty, and he has been co-host Shez. That has been another Shakedown podcast for another week. We will see you same time, same place next week. Please enjoy the racing at Monza, and remember, as always, to look but never stare. Peace.